The carriage wheels had rattled for hours before the gates of the royal court rose before me, tall and unyielding, carved with lions and vines that seemed to mock my smallness. I had never belonged to such places. My hands, folded tightly in my lap, bore the faint calluses of work that no noble woman would admit to. I had been raised in silence, in corners, in the shadow of others' importance. My father's voice had been stern, my mother's weary, and together they had taught me that I was not meant to be seen. Low-born daughters were not treasures. They were burdens carried quietly, like stones in a pocket. The guards did not look at me as I passed through the gates. Their eyes slid over me as though I were mist. I felt relief in that invisibility, though it stung. To be unseen was safer than to be mocked. Inside, the court was a world of candlelight and velvet. The air smelled faintly of roses and wine, and the polished stone beneath my shoes reflected the glow of chandeliers. I moved carefully, as though each step might betray me. My gown was plain, though pressed as neatly as I could manage. Its fabric did not shimmer like the silks of the noble women who drifted past me, their laughter like bells, their jewels catching the light. I kept my eyes lowered, my breath shallow, and prayed no one would ask who I was or why I had come. The opening ball had already begun. Music swelled from the far end of the hall, violins weaving through the hum of voices. Couples moved across the floor in practiced grace, skirts sweeping, hands clasped. I lingered at the edge, near a pillar draped in tapestry, and folded myself into stillness. My chair was tucked against the wall, half hidden, as though I were part of the stone itself. No one spoke to me. Words floated around me, fragments of gossip and laughter, but none landed in my direction. I was a shadow among brightness. My cheeks burned with the knowledge of my place. Yet I forced myself into quiet acceptance. This was what I had always known, to be overlooked, to be the one who did not matter. I watched the dancers, their faces flushed with joy, and wondered what it might feel like to be chosen, to be led into the center of the room with eyes upon me. The thought was foolish. I pressed it down. I was not meant for such things. A group of ladies passed near, their gowns rustling like whispers. One glanced at me, her eyes sliding over my plain dress, and her lips curved in a smile that was not kind. She leaned to her companion, and though I could not hear the words, I knew the tone. I lowered my gaze to my hands, twisting them together until the knuckles whitened. Embarrassment settled heavy in my chest, but I did not move. To flee would draw more notice than to remain still. The music shifted, a livelier tune, and laughter rose. I sat unmoving, my back straight, my breath shallow. The candlelight flickered across the polished floor, and I let my eyes trace the patterns of shadow rather than the faces that would not meet mine. I thought of home, of the small cottage where silence had been my companion. My mother had taught me to mend, to cook, to keep my head bowed. "Do not expect more than what is given," she had said often, her voice tired. I had believed her. I still did. Yet here, surrounded by grandeur, the ache of longing pressed against me. Not for jewels or gowns, but for something simpler. A voice that spoke my name, a glance that lingered, a hand that did not pass me by. The hours stretched. I remained in my corner, unnoticed, the hum of voices washing over me like a tide. My heart beat quietly, as though it too wished to remain hidden. Then, as the music softened into a slower rhythm, I lifted my eyes. Across the ballroom, beyond the swirl of dancers and the gleam of chandeliers, I saw him. A man stood apart, tall, his presence steady amid the shifting crowd. His attire marked him as someone of rank, though it was not the finery that caught me. It was his gaze. He was watching me, not in mockery, not in passing. His eyes held mine across the distance, unwavering as though he had been waiting. I froze, breath caught in my throat. Confusion stirred within me, sharp and unfamiliar. Why would he look at me? What did that expression mean? Neither disdain nor amusement, but something I could not name. The hall seemed to fade, the laughter dimming, the music distant. All that remained was the weight of his gaze, steady and unyielding, fixed upon me. I did not understand it. I did not understand him. And yet, I could not look away. The music swelled and faded, dancers turning like shadows in candlelight. Yet my gaze remained fixed upon him. I told myself it was a mistake, that he was not truly looking at me, that his eyes must have been drawn past me to someone else more worthy of attention. But when he began to move, steady and deliberate, weaving through the crowd with a grace that seemed almost reluctant, I felt the air tighten around me. I lowered my eyes at once, heart pounding, willing myself to vanish into the stone wall behind me. He would pass by. He must. Men like him did not cross rooms for women like me. Yet his footsteps slowed. I sensed his presence before I dared to lift my gaze. He stood before me, tall, composed, his expression unreadable in the shifting glow of the chandeliers. "Lady Grey," he said, his voice low, measured, carrying none of the mockery I had braced myself for. I blinked, startled. No one here had spoken my name. Few even knew it. My lips parted, but no words came. He inclined his head slightly, as though greeting me with respect. "You are newly arrived at court." I nodded, uncertain, my throat tight. "Yes, my lord." The words were barely audible. His eyes did not leave mine. They were steady, patient, as though he had all the time in the world to wait for me to speak. It unsettled me more than scorn would have. "You sit apart," he observed, not unkindly. "Is it by choice?" I swallowed, fingers twisting in my lap. "It is safer," I murmured, then regretted the honesty. I should have said nothing. But he did not laugh. His gaze softened, though his face remained composed. "Safer," he repeated, as though tasting the word. "And yet you are here, among them." I could not answer. My silence stretched, heavy, until I forced myself to look away, to the flicker of candlelight on the polished floor. He did not move. Instead, his voice came again, quieter, almost thoughtful. "You, right." My head snapped up, confusion breaking through my guarded stillness. "I, what?" His eyes flicked briefly to my hands, folded tightly together. "Ink stains," he said simply, "at the edge of your fingers, faint but there." I glanced down, startled. The marks were small, nearly invisible, remnants of the hours I had spent with quills and parchment, copying texts in solitude. No one had ever noticed. No one had ever cared. Heat rose to my cheeks. "It is nothing," I whispered. "A habit." "Not nothing," he said, his tone firm but gentle. "It speaks of patience, of thought." I shook my head quickly, desperate to dismiss it. "It speaks of low work, my lord, of tasks given to those who are overlooked." His eyes held mine again, steady, unyielding. "Or of one who sees what others do not." The words unsettled me more than any jest could have. I felt exposed, as though he had peeled back the thin veil I wore to hide myself. My breath caught, and I looked away once more, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. Silence stretched between us, yet it was not empty. It was filled with the sound of my heartbeat, the faint rustle of gowns, the distant notes of violins. He did not press me, did not demand words, but his presence lingered, patient. At last, I forced myself to speak, though my voice trembled. "Why do you address me, my lord? There are many here more deserving of your notice." His reply came without hesitation. "Deserving is not the measure I use." I stared at him, bewildered. The nobles around us laughed, danced, whispered. Yet in that moment, it felt as though the hall had narrowed to the space between us. "You mistake me," I said quickly, desperate to shield myself. "I am no one of importance. I should not." He raised a hand slightly, not to silence me, but to steady the air between us. "You are Eleanor Grey," he said, as though the name itself carried weight. "That is enough." My breath faltered. No one had ever spoken my name with such certainty, as though it mattered. I searched his face for mockery, for some hidden jest, but found none. His expression remained calm, reserved, yet there was something beneath it I could not name. The music shifted again, a swell of strings, and the dancers turned. He did not move to join them. His attention remained fixed upon me, unwavering. I felt small beneath it, yet not diminished. Instead, a strange unease stirred within me, as though the ground beneath my feet had shifted. "You should not waste your time," I whispered, my voice breaking. "There are others." His gaze did not waver. "I do not waste time." The words struck me like a bell, quiet yet resonant, echoing in the hollow places within me. I could not understand them, could not understand him. And then, with a calmness that unsettled me more than any storm, he said, "I intend to know you, Eleanor." My breath caught, the world tilting, the candlelight blurring. I could not make sense of it, of him, of the weight in his voice that spoke of something I had never believed could be meant for me. The gardens lay hushed beneath the weight of evening, the air cool and fragrant with the last bloom of roses. Lanterns hung from wrought iron hooks, their flames trembling against the breeze, casting long shadows across the gravel paths. I walked slowly, my steps measured, my hands folded before me, hoping the silence would shield me from the strangeness of what had unfolded in the ballroom. Yet he was beside me. Adrian Thorne, prince of this court, his presence steady as stone. He did not hurry me, nor did he fill the air with words. His silence was not neglect, but patience, and that unsettled me more than any jest or command could have. I kept my gaze lowered, tracing the pale stones beneath my feet. My heart beat too loudly in my chest, and I feared he might hear it. At last, his voice came, quiet, almost thoughtful. "Do you prefer solitude?" The question startled me. It was not the kind nobles asked. They asked of lineage, of wealth, of alliances. His words were simple, yet they reached too close. I hesitated, then answered softly, "It is familiar." He did not press. He only inclined his head, as though the answer was enough. We walked on. The roses brushed against the path, their petals pale in the lantern light. I tried to keep distance between us, a careful step to the side, but he matched my pace without closing the space. It was as though he knew I needed it. Another question came, gentle as the breeze. "You write often?" I stiffened. Again the ink stains. Again the part of me no one had ever cared to notice. "Yes," I admitted reluctantly. "It passes the hours." "What do you write?" His tone was not demanding, only curious. I shook my head quickly. Copies, records, nothing of worth. He glanced at me, his expression unreadable. Worth is not always measured by others. The words lingered, heavy, and I felt the urge to retreat. I feared he was mocking me, though his voice carried no trace of it. My breath caught, and I turned my eyes to the roses, desperate to anchor myself in their stillness. We walked further, the path winding toward a fountain where water whispered against stone. The sound filled the silence between us, soft and steady. He spoke again, after a pause. "Do you find peace in words?" I faltered, my steps slowing. No one had ever asked me such a thing. My throat tightened. "Sometimes," I whispered, "they do not look away." The admission slipped out before I could stop it. Shame followed, sharp and immediate. I had revealed too much. Yet he did not laugh. He did not dismiss me. He only nodded, as though he understood. His silence was not empty. It was listening. I felt seen, and the sensation was unbearable. To be ignored was familiar, safe. To be noticed was dangerous. It stirred something fragile within me, something I had long buried. I quickened my pace, hoping distance might restore the balance. But he remained beside me, unhurried, steady. "You carry yourself with care," he said quietly, as though each step must be measured. I froze, breath caught. He had seen it, the way I moved, cautious, restrained, as though the world might break if I pressed too hard against it. "It is habit," I said, voice trembling. "One learns not to draw notice." His gaze lingered, calm yet intent. "And yet, notice finds you." The words struck deep, unsettling, impossible. I shook my head, desperate to deny them. "You mistake me, my lord. I am not." He did not let me finish. His voice was firm, though still quiet. "I do not mistake." The air thickened around us. My heart raced, my breath shallow. I felt as though the lantern light itself pressed upon me, exposing what I had tried so long to hide. We reached the fountain. The water shimmered in the glow, rippling softly. I stood still, uncertain, my hands clasped tightly. He did not move closer. He did not demand. He only stood beside me, his presence steady, his silence patient. I wanted to flee. I wanted to remain. The conflict tore at me, leaving me breathless. At last, I whispered, "Why do you speak to me so?" His answer came without hesitation. "Because you listen." The simplicity of it unsettled me more than any grand declaration could have. My chest tightened, my eyes stung. I turned away, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. The garden was quiet, the air cool, the roses trembling in the breeze. I felt the world narrow to the space between us, fragile and uncertain. And then, from the path behind, a voice broke the stillness. "Eleanor Gray." I turned sharply. A nobleman stood at the edge of the lantern light, his eyes wide with shock, his mouth parted in disbelief. His gaze flicked between Adrian and me, and the disapproval in his expression was unmistakable. The silence shattered. The days that followed were heavy with whispers. They clung to the corridors like smoke, curling through the tapestries and drifting beneath the vaulted ceilings. I had thought myself invisible, but now I was too visible, though not in the way I had ever longed for. I heard them first in the ballroom, when I lingered near the edge of the crowd. A cluster of noble women stood together, their voices low but sharp enough to cut. "She thinks herself noticed," one murmured, her jeweled hand fluttering like a bird, as though the prince would waste his gaze on her. Another laughed softly, cruelly, low-born and plain, It is almost comical. Perhaps she imagines herself in some tale. Their words struck like stones, though I kept my face composed, my eyes lowered. I had learned long ago how to endure silence, but enduring scorn was different. It burned. Later, in the gallery, I passed two men in hushed conversation. They did not see me in the shadows. "Unworthy," one said, his tone dismissive. "She should be grateful for a glance, yet she lingers near him as though she belongs." The other chuckled. "Delusion. That is all it is. She will learn soon enough." I moved on quickly, my breath shallow, my hands trembling. Their words echoed in my chest, louder than the music of the court, louder than the bells that marked the hours. I withdrew. I avoided the halls where laughter rose, the chambers where nobles gathered. I kept to the quiet corners, the narrow stairways, the gardens at dawn when no one else stirred. And most of all, I avoided him. When I sensed his presence, I turned away. When I heard his voice, I slipped into silence. I told myself it was for his sake as much as mine. If the court saw us together, the whispers would grow sharper, crueler. Better to vanish, better to return to invisibility. Yet, invisibility was no longer simple. He noticed absence as much as presence. It was in the cloistered passage near the library that he found me. I had pressed myself against the cool stone, hoping the shadows would hide me. But his footsteps came, steady, unhurried, and then he was there, tall and composed, the lantern light catching the edge of his profile. "Eleanor," he said, his voice quiet but firm. I froze, breath caught, unable to meet his gaze. "You avoid me," he continued, not accusing, only stating. My throat tightened. I wanted to deny it, but the truth lay heavy between us. "I do not wish to trouble you," I whispered, my voice barely audible. His brow furrowed slightly. "You do not trouble me." I shook my head quickly, desperate to retreat. "The court speaks. They say I am foolish, unworthy. They laugh at the thought that you would—" My voice broke, shame flooding through me. I could not finish. He did not move closer, yet his presence pressed against me, steady, unyielding. Do their words matter more than mine? The question struck deep. I had lived my life by the measure of others, by their silence, by their disregard. To be asked to weigh his words against theirs was unbearable. "I cannot be what they expect," I whispered, trembling. "I cannot be what you deserve." His gaze held mine, unwavering. "You are what you are. That is enough." The simplicity of it unsettled me more than any grand speech could have. My chest tightened, my breath faltered. I wanted to believe him. Yet the echoes of cruel laughter rang louder. I turned away, pressing my hand against the cold stone wall as though it might steady me. "You do not understand," I murmured. "They will never accept it. They will never accept me." His voice came, calm and certain. "I do not seek their acceptance." The words hung in the air, heavy, impossible. My heart raced, my thoughts tangled. I could not make sense of him, of his patience, of his persistence. Silence stretched between us, filled only by the faint flicker of the lantern flame. I felt the weight of his gaze, steady and unyielding, and the fear within me rose until it pressed against my throat. At last, the question broke free, trembling, terrified, raw. "Why me?" The words hung in the air, fragile and desperate, the echo of all my doubts, all my fears. The silence after my question stretched long, heavy as the stone walls around us. I had spoken the words I feared most, and now they hung between us, fragile, trembling. Why me? Adrian did not answer at once. He stood steady, his gaze fixed upon me, as though he weighed each word before allowing it into the air. The lantern light flickered across his face, softening the sharpness that others feared, revealing something quieter beneath. When he spoke, his voice was low, unadorned, without the grandeur of courtly speech. "Because you are real." I blinked, startled. The answer was too simple, too bare. "Real?" I echoed, my voice breaking. He inclined his head slightly, his eyes never leaving mine. "This court is filled with masks, words polished until they shine, gestures rehearsed until they deceive. I have lived among them all my life. Yet when I looked at you, I saw no mask. I saw someone who does not pretend." My breath caught. I wanted to deny it, to retreat into the safety of invisibility, but his words pressed against the hollow places within me. "You think me plain," I whispered, desperate to shield myself. "Unremarkable." His gaze softened, though his voice remained steady. "I think you honest. I think you see the world as it is, not as it is performed." I shook my head quickly, shame rising. "That is not enough. It cannot be enough." He did not argue. He did not try to convince me with flattery or promises. He only spoke, calm and certain. "It is enough for me." The words lingered, quiet yet unyielding. My chest tightened, my breath faltered. I had lived my life believing I was less, believing worth was measured in beauty, in lineage, in wealth. To hear him speak otherwise was unbearable, and yet it was a balm I did not know I needed. I turned away, pressing my hand against the cold stone wall, as though it might steady me. "You do not understand," I murmured. "I am not strong. I am not clever. I am nothing they would ever choose." His reply came softly, without hesitation. "I do not seek what they would choose." The simplicity of it unsettled me more than any grand declaration could have. My heart raced, my thoughts tangled. I wanted to flee, yet his voice held me still. He stepped closer, though not enough to crowd me. His presence was steady, patient, like the rhythm of the fountain's water beyond the cloister. When you sit in silence, you are not empty. You are listening. When you walk, you measure each step, not out of fear alone, but out of care. When you write, you leave marks that others overlook. Yet, they speak of thought, of patience. These things are not nothing. They are you. My throat tightened. No one had ever spoken of me in such a way. No one had ever noticed the small fragments I had thought meaningless. I whispered, trembling, "You see too much." His gaze held mine, unwavering. "I see enough." The words pressed against me, not demanding, not heavy, but steady, like a hand offered without force. I felt the fear within me shift, trembling, uncertain. It did not vanish, but it softened, replaced by something fragile, something I had never known. Safety. I lowered my eyes, unable to bear the weight of his gaze. My hands twisted together, knuckles white, as though I could hold myself together by force alone. He did not move closer. He did not demand more. He only stood, patient, his silence filled with presence. The air was cool, the lantern flame flickering, the stone beneath my hand cold. Yet within me, warmth stirred, fragile, hesitant. I dared to lift my gaze once more. His eyes met mine, steady, calm, without judgment. "You are not nothing, Eleanor," he said softly. "You are yourself. That is what drew me." The words struck deep, quiet, yet unyielding. My breath trembled, my chest tight. I wanted to deny them, yet I could not. They were too simple, too true. Silence stretched between us, filled with the sound of water, the flicker of flame, the rhythm of my heartbeat. And then, slowly, carefully, he moved, his hand lifted, steady, deliberate, reaching toward mine. He did not touch. He did not force. His hand hovered, close enough that I felt the warmth of it, yet not close enough to break the fragile space between us. The smallest gesture, yet it carried the weight of all he had spoken. My breath caught, the world narrowing to that space, that moment, that hand reaching toward mine. The days unfolded with a quiet rhythm, each one carrying with it small moments that lingered longer than I wished to admit. I had expected his words to fade, to dissolve into the noise of the court, but they did not. They remained, steady as his presence, echoing softly in the hollow places within me. I saw him often, though not in the grand halls where nobles gathered. He seemed to find me in the quieter corners, the library alcove where the dust lay thick upon forgotten texts, the gardens at dawn when the roses bent beneath dew, the cloisters where the air smelled faintly of stone and candle wax. He did not intrude. He did not demand. He simply appeared. And in his silence, I found something I had never known: ease. We spoke little. Sometimes only a word, sometimes none at all. Yet the silence was not empty. It was filled with the sound of footsteps on gravel, the rustle of leaves, the faint hum of water in the fountain. It was filled with the weight of his gaze, steady and patient, and the warmth of his presence beside me. I began to notice the smallest things, the way his eyes softened when he listened, the way his breath slowed, as though he matched his rhythm to mine, the faint curve of his mouth when I allowed myself the smallest smile. These fragments were nothing, and yet they were everything. The court continued its whispers. I heard them still, sharp and cruel, but they no longer pierced as deeply. Their voices seemed distant, muffled, as though I walked within a different world. For when he was near, the noise of others faded. I did not yet believe I deserved kindness. That lesson had been carved too deeply into me, but I began to hope. Hope that perhaps kindness could exist, even if it was not mine to claim. Hope that perhaps I could stand in its light, if only for a moment. One evening, as the sun sank low and the lanterns flickered to life, we walked together in the gardens. The air was cool, carrying the faint scent of lavender. My hands were folded tightly before me, as they always were, a habit born of restraint. He walked beside me, his steps measured, his silence patient. At last, his voice came, quiet, almost thoughtful. "You are less afraid now?" I startled, my breath catching. "Afraid?" He inclined his head slightly. "Of being seen?" I lowered my gaze quickly, shame rising. "I am still afraid," I whispered. His reply came without hesitation. "And yet you remain." The words lingered, soft but unyielding. My chest tightened, my breath faltered. I wanted to deny them, yet I could not. I had remained. I had not fled. We reached the fountain, its water shimmering in the lantern light. I stood still, uncertain, my hands clasped tightly. He did not move closer, yet his presence pressed against me, steady, unyielding. Silence stretched, filled with the sound of water, the flicker of flame, the rhythm of my heartbeat. And then, slowly, deliberately, he moved. His hand lifted, steady, intentional, reaching toward mine. I froze, breath caught, my chest tight. His hand hovered, close enough that I felt the warmth of it, yet not close enough to break the fragile space between us. He did not rush. He did not force, he waited, patient, as though the choice were mine. My hands trembled. I had lived my life believing I was unworthy of touch, unworthy of notice. To feel his hand reaching toward mine was unbearable, and yet it was a balm. At last, with a breath that shook, I let my fingers loosen. His hand closed gently around mine, slow, careful, intentional. The warmth of his touch spread through me, fragile, hesitant, yet steady. It was not possession. It was not demand. It was simply presence, offered and accepted. I felt the fear within me shift, trembling, uncertain. It did not vanish, but it softened, replaced by something fragile, something I had never known. Safety. We stood in silence, our hands joined, the lantern light flickering across the water. The world seemed to narrow to that moment, that touch, that fragile connection. And for the first time, I allowed myself to believe. For the first time, I whispered, my voice trembling. I wasn't afraid of being chosen. Thank you for listening. If this story found a place in you, come back when your heart wants another. With love, Claire